Hi, welcome back to Reading with Leon. We are going to be reading Adventures of Raggedy Ann by Johnny Gruelle. Not sure how you say it, but there's not really pictures. But I thought it was a good one because my aunt, who's my godmother, had Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls. And I used to collect them when I was in school because I was part of a group called the Eunomian Society. So our thing was Raggedy Ann and Andy and Daisies and Yellow, which was a lot of fun. And I'm still really friends with a lot of them. Let's see here. It says preface and dedication. It says, as I write this, I have before me on my desk, propped up against the telephone, an old rag doll. Dear old Raggedy Ann, the same Raggedy Ann with which my mother played with as a child. There she sits, a trifle loppy and loose-jointed, looking me squarely in the face in a straightforward, honest manner, a twinkle where her shoe-button eyes reflect the light. Evidently, Raggedy had been to a tea party today, for her face is covered in chocolate. She smiles happily and continuously. True, she has been nibbled by mice who have made nests out of the soft cotton which she has been stuffed, but Raggedy smiled just as broadly when the mice nibbled at her, for her smile is painted on. What adventures you must have had, Raggedy! What joy and happiness you have brought into this world, and no matter what treatment you have received, how patient you have been. What lessons of kindness and fortitude you might teach, could you but talk, you with your wisdom of 59 years. No wonder rag dolls are the best beloved. You are so kind, so patient, and so lovable. The more you become torn, tattered, and loose-jointed rag dolls, the more you are loved by children. Who knows but that fairyland is filled with old, lovable rag dolls, soft, loppy rag dolls who ride through all the wonders of fairyland in the crook of dimpled arms, snuggling close to childish chest within each beat hearts filled with eternal sunshine. So to the millions of children and grown-ups who have loved a rag doll, I dedicate these stories of Raggedy Ann. And it says Johnny Gruelle. Introduction. Little picture there. Marcella liked to play up in the attic at Grandma's quaint old house, way out in the country, for there were so many old forgotten things to find up there. One day, when Marcella was up in the attic and had played with the old spinning wheel until she had grown tired of it, she curled up on an old horsehair sofa to rest. I wonder what is in that barrel way back in the corner, she thought, as she jumped from the sofa and climbed over 2 dusty trunks to the barrel standing back under the eaves. It was quite dark back there, so when Marcella had pulled a large bundle of things from the barrel, she took them over to the dormer window where she could see better. There was a funny little bonnet with long white ribbons. Marcella put it on. In an old leather bag, she found a number of tintypes of queer-looking men and women in old-fashioned clothes. And there was one picture of a very pretty little girl with long curls tied tightly back from her forehead and wearing a long dress and queer pantaloons which reached to her shoe tops. And then out of the heap she pulled an old rag doll with only one shoe-button eye and a painted nose and a smiling mouth. Her dress was of soft material, blue, with pretty little flowers and dots all over it. Forgetting everything else in the happiness of her find, Marcella caught up the rag doll and ran downstairs to show it to Grandma. Well, well, where did you find it? Grandma cried. It's old Raggedy Ann, she went on as she hugged the doll to her breast. I had forgotten her. She had been in the attic for 50 years, I guess. Well, well, dear old Raggedy Ann, I will sew another button on her right away, said Grandma. She went to the machine drawer and got her needle and thread. Marcella watched the sewing while Grandma told how she had played with Raggedy Ann when she was a little girl. Now, Grandma laughed, Raggedy Ann, you have two fine shoe-button eyes, and with them you can see the changes that have taken place in the world while you have been shut up so long in the attic. For Raggedy Ann, you have a new playmate and a mistress now, and I hope you both will have as much happiness together as you and I used to have. Then Grandma gave Raggedy Ann to Marcella, saying very seriously, Marcella, let me introduce my dear friend Raggedy Ann. Raggedy, this is my granddaughter Marcella. Grandma gave the doll a twitch with her fingers in such a way that the rag doll nodded her head to Marcella. Oh, Grandma, thank you ever and ever so much, Marcella cried, and she gave her grandma a hug and a kiss. Raggedy Ann and I will just have loads of fun. And this is how Raggedy Ann joined the doll family at Marcella's house, where she began the adventures of Raggedy Ann, told in the following stories. Chapter 1. Raggedy Ann learns a lesson. There's Marcella with all her dolls. One day the dolls were left all to themselves. Their little mistress had placed them all around the room and told them to be nice children while she was away. And there they sat and never so much as wiggled a finger until their mistress had left the room. Then the soldier dolly turned his head and solemnly winked at Raggedy Ann. And when the front gate clicked and the dollies knew they were alone, they all scrambled to their feet. Now let's have a good time, cried the tin soldier. Let's all go in search of something to eat. Yes, let's all go in search of something to eat, cried the other dollies. When Mistress had me out playing with me this morning, said Raggedy Ann, she carried me by a door near the back of the house, and I smelled something which smelled as if it would taste delicious. Then you lead the way, Raggedy Ann, cried the French dolly. I think it would be a good plan to elect Raggedy Ann as our leader on this expedition, said the Indian doll. At this, all the other dolls clapped their hands together and shouted, Hurrah! Raggedy Ann will be our leader. So Raggedy Ann, very proud indeed to have the confidence and love of all the other dollies, said that she would be very glad to be their leader. Follow me, she cried, as her wobbly legs carried her across the floor at a lively pace. The other dollies followed, racing about the house until they came to the pantry door. This is the place, cried Raggedy Ann, and sure enough, all the dollies smelled something which they knew must be very good to eat. Wonder what it'll be. But none of the dollies was tall enough to open the door, and although they pushed and pulled with all their might, the door remained tightly closed. The dollies were talking and pulling and pushing, and every once in a while would fall over, and the others would step on her in an effort to open the door. Finally, Raggedy Ann drew away and sat on the floor. When the other dollies discovered Raggedy Ann sitting there, running her rag hands through her yarn hair, they knew she was thinking. Shh, shh, they said to each other, and quietly went over near Raggedy Ann and sat down in front of her. There must be a way, said Raggedy Ann. Raggedy says there must be a way to get inside, cried all the dolls. There's Raggedy Ann thinking. She's thinking hard. I can't seem to think clearly today, said Raggedy Ann. It feels as if my head were ripped. At this, the French doll ran to Raggedy Ann and took off her bonnet. Yes, there is a rip in your head, Raggedy, she said. She pulled a pin from her skirt and pinned up Raggedy's head. It's not a very neat job, for I got some puckers in it, she said. Oh, that is ever so much better, cried Raggedy Ann. Now I can think quite clearly. Now Raggedy can think clearly, cried all the dolls. My thoughts must have leaked out of the rip before, said Raggedy Ann. They must have leaked out before, dear Raggedy, cried all the other dolls. Now that I can think so clearly, said Raggedy, I think the door must be locked, and to get in we must unlock it. That will be easy, said the Dutch doll, who says, Mama, when he is tipped backward and forward, for the brave tin soldier can shoot the key out of the lock. I can easily do that, cried the tin soldier as he raised his gun. Oh, Raggedy, cried the French dolly, please do not let him shoot. No, said Raggedy Ann, we must think of a quieter way. After thinking quite hard for a moment, Raggedy Ann jumped up and said, I have it! And she caught up the jumping jack and held him up to the door. Then Jack slid up his stick and unlocked the door. There they are talking, and that's going to be after. Let me read. I just thought I'd show it to you now. Then the dollies all pushed, and the door swung open. My, such a scramble. The dolls piled over one another in their desire to be the first to the goodies. They swarmed up the pantry shelves, and in their eagerness spilled a pitcher of cream which ran all over the French dolly's dress. Oh no, she looked all dirty. The Indian doll found some cornbread, and dipping it in the molasses, he sat down for a good feast. I love cornbread. I put a little brown sugar in mine, and then if I want it extra sweet, I put honey on it. But even just the brown sugar cornbread tastes good with butter on it, real butter. A jar of raspberry jam was overturned, and the dollies ate of this until their faces were all purple. The tin soldier fell from the shelf 3 times and bent one of his tin legs, but he scrambled right back up again. Never had the dolls had so much fun and excitement, and they had all eaten their fill when they heard the click of the front gate. They did not take time to climb from the shelves, but all rolled or jumped off to the floor and scrambled back to their room as fast as they could, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs and jam along the way back to the nursery. Just as the mistress came into the room, the dolls dropped in whatever positions they happened to be in. This is funny, cried Mistress. They were all left sitting in their places around the room. I wonder if Fido had been shaking them up. Then she saw Raggedy Ann's face and picked her up. Why, Raggedy Ann, you're all sticky. I do believe you are covered in jam, said, and Mistress tasted Raggedy Ann's hand. Yes, it's jam. Shame on you, Raggedy Ann. You've been in the pantry and all the others, too. And with this, the doll's mistress dropped Raggedy Ann on the floor and left the room. When she came back, she had on an apron, and her sleeves were rolled up. She picked up all the sticky dolls and put them in the basket and carried them out under the apple tree in the garden. There she placed her little tub and wringer, and she took the dolls one at a time and scrubbed them with a scrubbing brush and soused them up and down and this way and that in the soap suds until they were all clean. Then she hung them all out on the clothesline in the sunshine to dry. There the dolls hung all day, swinging and twisting about as the breeze swayed the clothesline. I do believe she scrubbed my face so hard she wore off my smile, said Raggedy Ann after an hour of silence. No, it's still there, said the tin soldier as the wind twisted him around so he could see Raggedy. But I do believe my arms will never work without squeaking. They feel so rusted, he added. And there's a picture of him on the clothesline. And there's her talking to Raggedy. And, yep, Raggedy's still covered with jam there. Just then the wind twisted the little Dutch doll and loosened his clothespin, so he fell to the grass below with a sawdust bump, and he rolled over and said, Mama, in a squeaky voice. Late in the afternoon, the back door opened and the little mistress came out with a table and chairs. After setting the table, she took all the dolls from the line and placed them about the table. They had lemonade with grape jelly in it, which made a beautiful lavender color, and little baby teeny weeny cookies with powdered sugar on them. After this lovely dinner, the dollies were taken in the house where they had their hair brushed and nice clean nighties put on. Then they were placed in their beds and Mistress kissed each one good night and tiptoed from the room, closing the door very gently behind her. All the dolls lay as still as mice for a few minutes. Then Raggedy Ann raised up her cotton-stuffed elbows and said, "I have been thinking." "Shh," said all the other dollies. "Raggedy has been thinking." "Yes," said Raggedy Ann, "I have been thinking our mistress gave us nice dinner out under the trees to teach us a lesson. She wanted to teach us that we could have had all the goodies we wished if we had behaved ourselves, and her lesson was that we must never take without asking what we could always have for the asking. So let us all remember and try never again to do anything which might cause those who love us any unhappiness of any kind." "Let us all remember," chimed in all the other dollies, and Raggedy Ann, with a merry twinkle in her shoe-button eyes, lay back in her little bed, her cotton head filled with the thoughts of love and happiness. There they are having the tea party, and there's Raggedy on the line while she was drying. The next one is called Raggedy Ann and the Kite. There's Raggedy Ann with the kite in the picture. Raggedy Ann watched with interest the preparations. A number of sticks were being fastened together with strings and covered with a light cloth. Raggedy Ann heard some of the boys talk of the kite, so Raggedy Ann knew this must be a kite. When the tail had been fastened to the kite and a large ball of heavy twine tied to the front, one of the boys walked off, unwinding the ball of twine. There was a nice breeze blowing, so the boy with the twine called, "Let her go!" and started running. Marcella held Raggedy up so that she could watch. How nicely it climbed! But suddenly the kite acted strangely, as all the children shouted advice to the boy with the ball of twine, and the kite been darting this way and that, and finally making 4 or 5 loop-de-loops, it crashed to the ground. "It needs more tail on it," one of the boys shouted. And the children asked each other where they might get more rags to fasten to the tail of the kite. "Let's tie Raggedy Ann to the tail," suggested Marcella. "I know she would enjoy the trip way up in the sky." All the boys shouted with delight at this new suggestion. "I don't like this suggestion." So Raggedy Ann was tied to the tail of the kite. This time the kite rose straight in the air and remained steady. The ball of twine unwound into the kite and Raggedy Ann were way up and far away. How Raggedy Ann enjoyed being up there. She could see for miles and miles, and how tiny the children looked. Suddenly a great puff of wind came and carried Raggedy Ann streaming out behind the kite. She could hear the wind singing on the twine as the strain increased. Suddenly Raggedy Ann felt something rip. Oh no! It was the rag to which she was tied. As each puff of wind caught her, the rip widened. When Marcella watched Raggedy Ann rise high above the field, she wondered how much Raggedy Ann enjoyed it and wished that she too might have gone along. But after the kite had been up in the air for 5 or 10 minutes, Marcella grew restless. Kites were rather tiresome. There was more fun in tea parties out under the apple tree. "Will you please pull down the kite now?" she asked the boy with the twine. "I want Raggedy Ann." "Let her ride up there," the boy replied. "We'll bring her home when we pull down the kite. We're going to get another ball of twine and let her go higher." Oh no! Marcella did not like to leave Raggedy Ann with the boys, so she sat down upon the ground to wait until they pulled down the kite. There's Raggedy Ann up on the end of the kite. But while Marcella watched Raggedy Ann dot in the sky, she could not see the one ripping the rag to which Raggedy Ann was tied. Suddenly the rag parted, and Raggedy Ann went sailing away as the wind caught her skirts. Marcella jumped from the ground, too surprised to say anything. The kite, released from the weight of Raggedy Ann, began darting and swooping to the ground. "We'll get her for you," some of the boys said when they saw Marcella's troubled face, and they started running in the direction Raggedy Ann had fallen. Marcella and the other girls ran with them. They ran, and they ran, and they ran, and at last they found the kite upon the ground with one of the sticks broken. But they could not find Raggedy Ann anywhere. "She must have fallen almost in your yard," a boy said to Marcella, "for the kite was directly over here when the doll fell." Marcella was heartbroken. She went in the house and lay on the bed. Mama went out with the children and tried to find Raggedy Ann, but Raggedy Ann was nowhere to be seen. When Daddy came home in the evening, he tried to find Raggedy, but met with no success. Marcella had hardly eaten any dinner, nor could she be comforted by Mama or Daddy. The other dolls in the nursery lay forgotten and were not put to bed that night, for Marcella lay and sobbed and tossed about in her bed. Finally, she said a little prayer for Raggedy Ann and went to sleep. And as she slept, Marcella dreamed that the fairies came and took Raggedy Ann with them to Fairyland for a visit, and then sent Raggedy Ann home to her. She awakened with a cry. Of course, Mama came to her bed right away and said that Daddy would offer a reward in the morning for the turn of Raggedy. Some pictures. I don't know what the pictures are to, but we shall see. "It was all my fault, Mama," Marcella said. "I should not have offered the boys dear Raggedy to tie to the tail of the kite, but I know the fairies will send her back." Mama took her in her arms and soothed her with cheering words, though she felt indeed that Raggedy was truly lost and would never be found again. Now, where do you suppose Raggedy Ann was all this time? When Raggedy Ann dropped from the kite, the wind caught her skirts and carried her along until she fell in the fork of a large elm tree directly over Marcella's house. When Raggedy Ann fell with a thud, face up in the fork of the tree, 2 robins who had a nest nearby flew chattering away. Presently the robins returned and quarreled at Raggedy Ann for lying so close to their nest, but Raggedy Ann only smiled at them and did not move. When the robins quieted down and quit their quarreling, one of them hopped up closer to Raggedy Ann in order to investigate. It was Mama Robin. She called to Daddy Robin and told him to come. "See the nice yarn. We could use it to line the nest with," she said. There's Raggedy Ann in the tree. So the robins hopped close to Raggedy Ann and asked if they might have some of her yarn hair to line their nest. Raggedy Ann smiled at them, so the 2 robins pulled and tugged at Raggedy Ann's yarn hair until they had enough to line their nest nice and soft. Evening came and the robins sang their good-night songs, and Raggedy Ann watched the stars come out, twinkle all night, and disappear in the morning light. In the morning, the robins again pulled yarn from Raggedy Ann's head and loosened her so she could peep over the side of the limb. And when the sun came up, Raggedy Ann saw she was in the trees of her own yard. Now, before she could eat any breakfast, Marcella started out to find Raggedy Ann, and it was Marcella herself who found her, and this is how she did it. Mama Robin had seen Marcella with Raggedy Ann out in the yard many times, so she began calling, "Cheery, cheery!" And Daddy Robin started calling, "Cheery, cheery, cheer up, cheerily, cheerily, cheery, cheery." And Marcella looked up into the tree above the house to see the robins and discovered Raggedy Ann peeping over the limb at her. Oh, how her heart beat with happiness. "Here is Raggedy Ann," she shouted as she ran towards the house. and Mama and Daddy came out and saw Raggedy Ann smiling at them, and Daddy got the clothes prop and climbed out of the attic window and poked Raggedy Ann out of the tree, and she fell right into Marcella's arms, where she was hugged in a tight embrace. "You'll never go up on a kite again, Raggedy Ann," said Marcella, "for I felt so lost without you, and I will never let you leave me again." So Raggedy Ann went into the house and had breakfast with her little mistress, and Mama and Daddy smiled at each other when they peeped through the door into the breakfast room, for Raggedy Ann's smile was wide and very yellow. Marcella, her heart full of happiness, was feeding Raggedy Ann part of her egg. That was a good one. I was so worried for Raggedy Ann. And this one is Raggedy Ann Rescues Fido. It's a picture of Raggedy Ann and one of the dollies. It was almost midnight and the dolls were asleep in their beds, all except Raggedy Ann. Raggedy lay there, her shoe-button eyes staring straight up at the ceiling. Excuse me. Every once in a while, Raggedy Ann ran her rag hand through her yarn hair. She was thinking. When she had thought for a long, long time, Raggedy Ann raised herself on her wobbly elbows and said, "I've thought it all out." At this, the other dolls shook each other and raised up, saying, "Listen, Raggedy Ann has thought it all out." "Tell us what you have been thinking, dear Raggedy," said the tin soldier. "We hope they were pleasant thoughts." "Not very pleasant thoughts," said Raggedy, as she brushed a tear from her shoe-button eyes. "You haven't seen Fido all day, have you?" "Not since early this morning," the French dolly said. "It has troubled me," said Raggedy, "and if my head was not stuffed with lovely new white cotton, I am sure it would have ached with worry. When Mistress took me into the living room this afternoon, she was crying, and I heard her Mama say, 'We will find him. He is sure to come home soon.' And I knew they were talking of Fido. He must be lost." The tin soldier jumped out of bed and ran over to Fido's basket, his 10 feet clicking on the floor as he went. "He is not here," he said. "When I was sitting in the window about noontime," said the Indian doll, "I saw Fido and a yellow, scraggly dog playing out on the lawn, and they ran through a hole in the fence." "Oh, goodness." "That was Priscilla's dog, Peterkin," said the French doll. "I know poor Mistress is very sad on account of Fido." "Supper time," said the Dutch doll, "because I was in the dining room at supper time, and I heard her daddy tell her to eat her supper, and he would go out and find Fido. But I had forgotten all about it until now." "That is the trouble with all of us except Raggedy Ann," cried the little penny doll in a squeaky voice. "She has to think for all of us. I think it would be a good plan for us to show our love for Mistress and try and find Fido," exclaimed Raggedy. "It is a good plan, Raggedy Ann," cried all the dolls. "Then let us waste no time in talking," said Raggedy Ann, as she jumped from bed, followed by the rest. The nursery window was open, so the dolls helped each other up on the sill and then jumped into the soft grass below. They fell in all sorts of queer attitudes, but of course the fall did not hurt them. There they are, escaping out the window. At the hole in the fence, the Indian doll picked up the trail of the two dogs. And the dolls, stringing out behind, followed him until they came to the Peterkins' house. Peterkins was surprised to see the strange little figures in white nighties come stringing up the path to the doghouse. Peterkins was too large to sleep in the nursery, so he had a nice cozy doghouse under the grape arbor. "Come in," Peterkins said when he saw and recognized the dolls. So all the dollies went into Peterkins' house and sat about while Raggedy Ann told them why he had come. "It has worried me too," says Peterkins, "but I had no way of telling your mistress where Fido was, for she cannot understand the dog language. For you see, Peterkins continued, Fido and I were having the grandest romp over in the park when a great big man with a funny thing on the end of his stick came running towards us. We barked at him, and Fido thought he was trying to play with us and went too close. And do you know that wicked man caught Fido in the thing at the end of the stick and carried him to the wagon and dumped him in the lot of other dogs? The dog catcher, cried Raggedy Ann. Yes, said Peterkins as he wiped his eyes with his paws. It was the dog catcher. For I followed the wagon at a distance, and I saw him put all the dogs into a big white wire pen so that none could get out. Then you know the way there, Peterkins? Asked Raggedy Ann. Yes, I can find it easily, Peterkins said. Then show us the way, Raggedy Ann cried, for we must try to rescue Fido. There they are. Excuse me. So Peterkins led the way up alleys and across streets. The dolls all pattering along behind him. It was a strange process. Once a strange dog ran out at them, but Peterkins told him to mind his own business, and the strange dog returned to his own yard. At last they came to the dog catcher's place. Some of the dogs in the pens were barking at the moon, and others were whining and crying. There was Fido, all covered in mud, and his pretty red ribbon dragging on the ground. My, but he was glad to see the dolls and Peterkins. All the dogs came to the side of the pen and twisting their heads from side to side, gazing in wonder at the queer figures of the dolls. We will try and let you out, said Raggedy Ann. At this, all the dogs barked joyfully. Then Raggedy Ann, the other dolls, and Peterkins went to the gate. The latch was too high for Raggedy Ann to reach, but Peterkins held Raggedy Ann in his mouth and stood up on his hind legs so that she could raise the latch. When the catch was raised, the dogs were so anxious to get out that they pushed and jumped against the gate so hard it blew open, knocking Peterkins and Raggedy Ann into the mud. Such a yapping and barking was never heard in the neighborhood as when the dogs swarmed out of the enclosure, jumping over one another and scrambling about in the mad rush to the gate. Fido picked himself up from where he had been rolled by the large dogs and helped Raggedy Ann to her feet. He, Peterkins, and all the dolls ran after the pack of dogs, turning the corner just as the dog catcher came running out of his house in his nightgown to see what was causing the trouble. He stopped in astonishment. Excuse me. He stopped in astonishment when he saw the string of dolls in white nighties pattering down the alley, for he could not imagine what they were. Well, you may be sure the dolls thanked Peterkins for his kind assistance. Bless you, Avery. And they and Fido ran on home, for a faint light was beginning to show in the east where the sun was ready to get up. When they got to their own house, they found an old chair out in the yard, and after a great deal of work, they finally dragged it to the window and managed to get into the nursery again. Fido was very grateful to Raggedy and the other dolls, and before he went to his basket, he gave them each a lick on the cheek. The dolls lost no time in scrambling into bed and pulling up the covers, for they were very sleepy. But just as they were dozing off, Raggedy Ann raised herself and said, "If my legs and arms were not stuffed with nice clean cotton, I feel sure that they would ache. But being stuffed with nice clean cotton, they do not ache, and I could not feel happier if my body were stuffed with sunshine. For I know how pleased and happy Mistress will be in the morning when she discovers Fido asleep in his own basket, safe and sound at home." Did I show you the picture of him climbing in the window? And the dollies by this time were all asleep. Raggedy Ann pulled the sheet up to her chin and smiled so hard she ripped 2 stitches out of the back of her rag head. And that is the end. I'll do the rest of it in another one. You guys have a good day.